So in this video, we're going to be talking about elaboration strategies. And elaboration happens after you have written your first draft with your structure in place, and now you want to elaborate on what you have so far. So there is a page in your notes, elaboration strategies, it's very basic. It's all about things that you can think of when you're trying to figure out how to stretch your sentences and say more than you've already said. So here are some ideas. Explain why not, explain how, explain the details, define, give an example. Now the list is kind of short, but one of the things that you'll notice here is the prevalence of the word explain. So that's one of the things that you really want to do quite a bit of. So let's see if we can take some of these ideas and put them into practice in the actual draft. This is the second body paragraph, the third paragraph of my sample essay, the one dealing with figurative language. And at this stage, it has just been literally lifted out of the outline and put into draft form. I haven't done anything else to it. So I'm just going to show you how I am going to go through this and maybe think about pulling out some of my ideas and looking for specifically where I have not said enough. So the book's figurative language also shows how Percy changes. Early on in the story, Percy is very troubled. On page 9 he says, "I was so mad my mind went blank, a wave roared in my ears." Okay, up here Percy is very troubled. I haven't really said enough about that. And I can do a little bit of brain barfing here just to elaborate a little bit and explain why, remember that was one of the things, explain why he is troubled. I can add, he has many problems, particularly with being able to stay in one school for longer than a year. He is constantly being expelled because his temper keeps getting the best of him. And I make a point of saying that because my example has to do with him losing his temper. On page 9 he says, "I was so mad my mind went blank, a wave roared in my ears." Now this is an example of personification, and it is important, by the way, in your figurative language paragraph to identify the kind of figurative language that you are using in your example. So this is an example of personification because waves can't actually roar. So if I scroll down a little bit and look at what I wrote in my points of analysis, this is an example of personification. It shows that Percy is unable to control himself or his temper. In fact, his temper is controlling him. The language in this phrase is interesting because the use of the word wave is a reference to his power with water. Okay, 3 choppy-ish kinds of sentences that aren't necessarily flowing together, and I do need to say a little bit more. Now here I could say a little bit more because I'm not really explaining how his temper is controlling him. And for this I'm actually going to go back to the example and look at this phrase right here, "my mind went blank," which technically, now that I think about it, is in fact a hyperbole because your mind can't really go completely blank. But his temper is controlling him to the point where he can't think. My mind went blank, he can't therefore think. So the temper is now in control and his mind is not. So I could say something about that. In fact, his temper is controlling him. In becoming so angry that his mind goes blank, he is telling the reader that his power to think his way through his rage has not been developed yet. A true hero would not let his temper rule him. Okay, so I've said a little bit more about this sentence here by explaining how his temper is controlling him. And looking for that, I'm going back into the text, back into my example to say more about the actual language that he is using in the example. And that's always a good thing, to really dig into the text and figure out exactly what's being said. So those are two examples of finding specific points in the text and just explaining more about them and elaborating more. A really good elaboration in your draft would be one that would add somewhere between half to 3/4 of a page to your entire document. So if you had a 2-page document and you expanded, then your expanded draft would look something like 2.5 or 2 3/4 pages. Okay, so that's elaboration, and you want to do lots and lots of that all the way through your draft.